Wow, I recommend, it's the best gift I can give.
You do it every day or every?
Almost every, yeah. I try to do it every day. I try to do it about twice a day. And if I could take a second to describe it, what it is it frees your mind of thought, and it takes you from a conscious state into your subconscious. And your subconscious is where creativity comes from, and equanimity and all of that. Like if you're calm and great ideas come to you. And when you have that equanimity, then as you're approaching everything, things are just the way they are, and you have to deal with them. And it's a little like being, in the ninja movies, it's a little bit like being the ninja, and everything seems slower and you can handle it better. And you align your subconscious, which is where the emotions and also inspirations come from, with your conscious mind. And when they're aligned and you have that equanimity, it's a great thing.
So you're going to write a book on transcendental meditation?
No.
Okay, so let's talk about this book, okay? The essence of it, again, summarizing a little more detail than I did before, your view is there are three big cycles in history. Is that fair? More or less?
Yeah, I came with the three things that are happening today, and then I found that there are really five.
Okay.
But the three big ones, yeah.
All right, so let's go through the first cycle. The first cycle is when an economy comes together, gets wealthy, people are building up the economy, and eventually they build it up so much they borrow more money than maybe they should, and they dilute their currency. Is that fair?
Yeah, I could do it in a quicker way.
Quicker than that?
Well, excuse me, better than that.
Better than that, okay. No doubt.
There's a new order. There's usually some fight between the left and the right, or it could be foreign countries and whatever new order. And then when that begins, it's sort of a great equalizer. And capitalism is a fantastic enabler, because what it does is it gives people who may not have anything, who have good ideas, capital, so they get the resources to pursue that, and that's a fabulous thing. And then as it rises over a period of time, you'll see debt to income ratios rise and so on, because everybody gets more funded, because debt is buying power and everybody wants more buying power. And then also you see it naturally distributes wealth unequally, and it distributes opportunity unequally. So as that wealth gaps rise and widen, and then also because it's parents who have wealthy parents can educate their children in an unfair, let's say an unequal way relative to others. And so, but it gets overly indebted. And then because all this buying power, which comes in the form of debt, is somebody else's assets, then what happens is then you lower interest rates, you try to stimulate it. So for example, since 1980, every cyclical peak and every cyclical trough in interest rates was lower than the one before it, so that they can stimulate more debt. And then when you get to zero interest rates, that doesn't work. So they have to print money and they buy money to get that pile going up. And that creates the cycle, okay? So there's part of that cycle which is a capital markets, and by the way, this exists almost everywhere. And then with that, and then you see the monetization of debt and so on. And with that, there are also conflicts that are the wealth conflicts, and related to that, the political left and the political right. And then that creates the dynamic that we're talking about.
Okay. Now, you're citing in your book two examples where this has happened before. One is in the Netherlands, where the Dutch economy, ultimately, they had the only reserve currency, at least in Western Europe, the guilder, and they did some of what you now say we're doing. Is that right?
Yeah, the same patterns over and over again. They had, in the beginning, big education, they won a war, then they became very competitive, they went out in the world taking their goods, and they built ships that were the best ships around the world, so they can go anywhere in the world. They brought their arms with them, and they made a fortune. And with that, they brought their currency. And as they bring their currency, because it's a world currency, a reserve currency, others want to own it. And because others want to own it, because that's buying power, it's the common wampum, and then because of that, then they lend it to the Dutch. So in other words, Americans get lent money because others want to hold dollars, and then that allows us, that's the exorbitant privilege, to get more and more in debt. And then what happens is they lose their competitiveness. The British came along and copied from the Dutch and found, oh, they could make ships better and cheaper. And then they became the competitors. And then as the competitors are operating, they take market share away, quite similar to lots of technology companies and what's going on now. And then what happens is then they get more in debt, and then they have the other cycle that's operating, and then you have the challenges of that.
So they had the Dutch, they typified by the Dutch tulip bulb craze, where people were spending a lot of guilders buying tulip bulbs, right? So that imploded, and the British came in and they built a big economy, and then they kind of went south a bit. They had the
same
reserve
exact
currency.
pattern.
And then we came along, the United States became the biggest economy in the world around 1870, and since World War II, we've been the dominant economy. So now we have a lot of debt, you'd say?
Yeah.
29 trillion?
Good.
About that. So how are we going to pay off that debt, by the way?
Well,
Inflation is the only way?
in the end, it's always print the
Inflation.
money.
Okay.
You know, it's always print the money, because you see, one man's debts are another man's assets. And so if you're holding a bond and you receive you don't get compensated for inflation. Let's say people think cash is a low risk investment. Well, they're earning no interest. And when you have a 7% or a 5% inflation, you lose 5% of your buying power. Or if you're owning a bond, you have the same thing. And so what happens is, not only is there the debt that is coming from the new debt created to run the deficits, but there become sellers of that debt, because the owner, as an asset, it's not a good asset. And then there's so much selling. And what that means is that you either have to, interest rates have got to go up, and then that grinds things down to a close, or what they do is they have to print money. And so the history of all of these cycles is that the coffers are empty, because you can't continue to spend more than you earn and give it to somebody, expect them to like it. And then you devalue it, and that becomes the cycle. And so you see the classic cycle of the ingredient is the cycle I'm talking about in terms of supply, demand, and the
All right,
debt.
well, you point this out because, one, you want people to know that we're borrowing too much money and we're devaluing the currency, just so the policymakers will maybe do something?
No, it's not that easy.
Why do you want to tell people this?
I only want people to look at it with me together, to see, do we agree on the mechanics, and do we agree on history, so that there's awareness for individuals, because I think individuals, what do they do with their money and how are they going to do? I just want to pass it along. I'm at a stage in my life, I just want to pass that along and decide that. But I think also, if you understand it for a society, it's not easy, because there are very big issues. We are bad, and our infrastructure is bad. Our educational gaps are enormous. I have personal contact with my wife working in the poor school districts in Connecticut. Let me give you the example. In Connecticut, which is one of the richest states in the country, 22% of the high school students are disengaged or disconnected. Disengaged means that their missing absentee rate is greater than 25%, and they're failing classes. That's disengaged. Disconnected means that they don't go to school, they don't know where they are. 22%, 1 out of 5 is there. If I'm in, and if I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, average school district is $24,000 a year. It's in Bridgeport, it's about $14,000 a year. These types of issues, and then infrastructure and so on, they are issues. So I'm not saying that the issues don't exist. It's a very easy thing to say not to pay the money, but if you look at the cycles, you have to come up with the money, and when a society as a whole is spending a lot more than it's earning, and to not be aware of that, either for the purpose of the society or for the purpose of individuals thinking, how do they take care of themselves, I wanted to pass it along.
So what you wanted to do is presumably let people know this is occurring, so maybe they could take action by letting their congressmen or governors know something about this, or not?
Well, I think there are two things. What you can do to make a better society, and
okay.
what you can do to make a better society in your contribution, but also how you can individually take care of yourself in a situation that might be difficult.
Okay, so let's finish on the third part of the cycle. The third part of the cycle is somebody's rising up, and right now you would say China's rising up. Is that correct?
There's just numbers, and you look at it, and
okay. So if I want to do something about it, and I want to live in a time when China is not rising up so much, and we're better off in the U.S. economy, what should I do? Should I lobby my members of Congress not to print so much money? What should I do about it, if anything?